No, thank you everyone for letting me come in and be a part of this this service today. I'm really excited. It's one of my last speaking events on my tour. So what I've been doing is going throughout LA and Malibu and trying to raise awareness about urban life, but more so trying to raise awareness about the fact that boys are part of this dialogue, because so often people think it's such an issue that affects women and children, and that's it. And I was one of those people. 3 years ago, I had no idea that, one, this issue even existed. I had never heard about human trafficking. I had never heard about modern day slavery. I was one of those people that thought, oh, well, Lincoln abolished slavery, so we're cool, we're good. It just doesn't exist. And it was such a massive eye-opener when I had an issue happen right in my own community, right in my own neighborhood in DC, that would just kind of spin my world, my perfect little world, into this turmoil. And you know, I was a Pepperdine graduate, so I went to school there in beautiful, sunny, gorgeous Malibu. And you know, life was good. Every day we were taught to serve and to go out and to freely give to people, but I never really took that to my core. And so after I graduated Pepperdine, I ended up working at Discovery Channel for a few years, and you know, the corporate job, making mom proud and getting that great paycheck, and I got married and lived in my beautiful house. And so for me, life was great. But I think really now in retrospect, I feel like the Lord was just ready to shake me up a little bit, because life was just kind of too perfect. And so it happened, Discovery had a round of layoffs, and I was one of the first people within the first group to get laid off from Discovery Channel. And initially I'm bawling, I'm crying, I'm thinking to myself, God, I must have not been good enough. I must have not been good enough that they would fire me so easily. And it ended up being the best thing that would ever happen to me, because at that moment I realized that I wasn't happy at Discovery. Yeah, we had the free coffee, the free chips, the cool setting, but I wasn't serving people, and that's what I really loved to do. And so I ended up going to work at a youth center in DC, working with teen moms. So I worked with amazing teen girls, all Latina girls, most of them undocumented. But from my background, I'm from Argentina, so I've always been obsessed with Latin America. I mean, it was just, I was a Latin American studies, I studied abroad in Argentina for a year. I mean, I was all about Latin America, and I spoke fluent Spanish. So it was really exciting for me to be able to talk to all of these great girls and be a mentor and a role model. And I was fully content in this job. But again, something would shake me, and it ended up happening that one of my girls that I just had a really solid relationship with would become a victim of this issue called sex trafficking. And at the time, I had no idea what it was. The mother of this girl, who was also someone that I knew from the community, she would come into the youth center all the time and really actively involved, would bring me gifts. She came in one day and she looked at me and she said, you know, Sylvia's missing. And I said, well, what do you mean Sylvia's missing? How does a 15-year-old just go missing? And she said, well, she hasn't been back, you know, for about 3 days, but don't worry, I'm sure she's going to reappear. So just so you know, don't expect to see her. And I thought that was really strange. The mom should be a little bit more distraught, upset, crying if your teenage daughter goes missing. So I ended up doing what any social service provider would do. I called the police. And you know, the police came through, these two big burly men and full uniform, and they come in and they sit down, and they don't even break out a pencil. They don't even break out a notebook. And they look me in the eye and they say, oh, she's a runaway. What do you want us to do? I mean, you're a youth center, you work with at-risk youth. She clearly ran away. And so I just wasn't satisfied with that answer. I thought, here I am coming to you for some reassurance, and you're really doing nothing for me. So I ended up putting pictures of this young 15-year-old girl all over DC, all over the community, passing out flyers, because in my heart of hearts, I knew that this 15-year-old girl wouldn't just go missing. She had just come from Honduras. So the likelihood of her to just run off with a boyfriend, which is what everyone thought, just didn't make sense to me. So 2 days go by, and all of a sudden I see this beautiful 15-year-old girl, Sylvia, in my office. And you know, I tell people, but it's not, you can never see what I saw that day, which was a young girl who had just had her entire childhood taken away from her. You know, she was thin, she had lost weight, she just looked ragged and miserable. And she falls to the ground and she starts crying. And I asked her, you know, Sylvia, what happened to you? Where did you go? And the story starts to unfold. It turns out that the mom was running a brothel in DC for Latino men, right around the corner from the Latin American Youth Center, right around on the same street a few doors down, running a brothel for Latino men. And how it works, or how I would learn that it works, is that the mom had her brothel in DC, and she had partners, trafficking partners, one in North Carolina. And the man in North Carolina would drive up to exchange the girls, to keep the market fresh, is what they say. So they would bring girls up from North Carolina to DC, from DC back to North Carolina. They would bring girls in from Honduras, from El Salvador, from Mexico. So you have this constant flood of movement of flesh, of humans. And the guy came up to DC and he saw this beautiful young girl and said, wow, she can make so much money for me. We can make a ton because she's young and she's beautiful. And so it starts to unfold that the mom was running this brothel. When the FBI agents raided the apartment, which Sylvia was locked in and kept not able to leave, they only found mattresses lying on the ground. They didn't find any water, no food, only condoms. That was it, condoms and lubricant. And you think that a 15-year-old girl having to sleep or live in those conditions and having to service these men that treat her just like an object. I was crushed. I was angry. I couldn't believe that here I was, a social service provider, here to protect the girls, and yet here one of my closest students fell victim to this issue. So I just went on a rampage. I literally became the person to go to talk about this issue and raise awareness. And it would happen that a few months later, I would get an email from the FBI agent. And it said in big letters, you know, go to Thailand, learn about trafficking and exploitation, and visit different organizations. And so my eyes just lit up. I was like, one, I want to go to Thailand. Like, who doesn't want to go to beautiful tropical Thailand? Of course. But more importantly, I wanted to go because I wanted to learn about why Thailand's known as the sex capital of the world. Why does it have that title? Why do people think they can go to this country and just buy people? And so it's such a foreign issue to me that I felt like I needed to be there for some reason. Even though I knew it was happening locally, I wanted to see it on an international scale. And so I ended up going to Thailand, which would be a 2-week, 11-day, right?
Yeah.
11-day kind of in and out. You travel there, you travel back. And this guy was on my trip. So he was one of the 11 volunteers that went with me out to Thailand that July. And it was our mission to get out there and to visit different organizations and make friends and meet new people. But more importantly, to spend 11 days completely wrapped in this issue and learning everything we could. And we did. So we ended up visiting different organizations, going through the Red Lake District. And you know, the crazy thing is that I had read about this. I had read the Not For Sale book. I had read dozens and dozens of books, articles, documentaries. And every book that I read, all I could see was a picture of Sylvia in my mind. Every victim had Sylvia's face on it. And so we're walking through the Red Lake District of Chiang Mai, and it's maybe 9 o'clock at night. We're doing outreach. So we're passing out condoms, we're talking to the people in the bars, and I'm not shocked because I feel like I've seen it through my books and through my articles, but I'm emotional and I'm still really angry that this issue exists. And how can these Western men be traveling to this country? And they're my Western men. I mean, they're men that look like they could be my brother or our college students or, you know, our peers. And here they are in these bars completely wasted, treating these beautiful women like they're nothing but an object, you know, picking them up and swinging them and mistreating them. And I mean, it wasn't shock, it was just complete, I don't know what the next level from shock is. It was just complete disgust because you're seeing what our people are capable of. And I never knew that there was such evil in the world until I found myself in that Red Lake District. And so we're walking through the bars, but it wouldn't be until I was in this one area where the boy bars are that my life would just shatter. I mean, it would change my course from being a teacher in DC to suddenly being this advocate for boys. And we're walking down with this group of people, and we're about to go into these bars to pass out condoms. And you look, and you're about to pass out condoms to an 11-year-old boy, a a 12-year-old boy, a 14-year-old boy, a 16-year-old boy, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, how come, first of all, I couldn't even believe that there were so many teenage boys and that they had never ever been mentioned in our conversation of human trafficking. That anytime people spoke of victims, it was always little children or it was women. And so here in front of us were these young victims, and I looked at the guy that we were with and and I said, okay, so what are we going to do about this? Like, who's doing anything? We can't just give them condoms, we have to give them more support. And the consensus throughout the community was, well, these boys, they're going to get HIV and die. So why should we waste our resources on them? We can tell them, here, come eat, come change your life, but they're not going to do it. They're stubborn, they're liars, they're thieves, they're drug addicts. And so I kind of just stopped in my tracks. I had gone into the bars, I had passed out these condoms, and I just saw the faces of these boys, and I thought, this is insane. And then I walked right back out, and I felt so angry at myself that I couldn't do more. And the guy that we were with, kind of the tour guy, the NGO worker, pulls us. He's like, all right, we're going, let's go. I'm like, that's it? I felt this shame, this complete just, why am I not doing more? And so that night we continued walking on, and I just remember those stares from the boys, almost like a plea of saying, come back, come help us, come do something. And you see these missionaries, these great missionaries going through the red light district where the women work. They're offering, prayer requests, they're offering English classes, they're offering cooking, baking classes. None of that was coming through the boy bars. And so that night, myself, Anthony, a few other of the volunteers went back to our hotel rooms, and I just beelined it for my room, and I called my husband, and I just started bawling. And he was actually he was in the airport ready to come over to meet me in Thailand. And we were going to have this romantic kind of after the 2-week time experience in Phuket and reconnect, and I mean, it was just, I was a blubbering mess. And he's like, okay, just calm down. I'll be there in, 48 hours, but just hang out, just don't do anything crazy. And that night, I ended up going with a few of the volunteers back to the bars. And we went back to the bars, one, because we were just so curious to know what was going on that hadn't been mentioned in our books or in the documentaries or through the speakers that we had met. And so we wanted to see for ourselves. And we went back to the bars. And it was like a movie. I mean, I can still see it in my mind, a 5'9" Latina woman walking into a bar full of men, full of teenagers, and just all of the eyes just completely on me. Not on any of the other male volunteers, but on me. And I was on blast. I felt like this was the stupidest thing I've probably ever done in my life and should not have happened. But again, there was that force kind of pushing us into the bars. And one of the boys, who I feel so bad for Matt and Anthony because they've heard this story so many times, but it's my favorite story because it was that moment that launched Urban Light. It really it was that one boy, and his name is Oi. And Oi came up to me, and all the other boys are playing Jenga and Connect 4 and talking with some of the other boys, but Oi comes up to me, and he taps me on the shoulder, and he's like, you here, no good, you go, go, go. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm face to face with this 16-year-old boy without a shirt on who's drinking whiskey, and I'm thinking, oh, this is so bad. And I don't speak Thai. And so I'm looking at him, and all of a sudden the stubbornness in me comes out, and I look him dead in the eye, and I'm like, no, I know, go, 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 okay? And then I kind of look away, and he just gets Oi's very dramatic. I've learned this about him over the years, but he crosses his hands, and he does this and then he looks at me and he's like, okay, you buy me whiskey. And I'm like, you are 16 years old, I'm not buying you whiskey. And I look at him and I'm like, no. And I go to where the other boys are and I sit at the table. And Oi, like a little puppy, comes right behind me. And again, he's I can feel him behind me. And he taps me on the shoulder and he says, okay, you buy me beer. And I was like, I can't believe I'm having this debate with this 16-year-old boy who weighs 100 pounds, so I can literally throw across the room he is, but he had this charisma, this spunk to him. And I look at him and I'm like, no. And then again, the drama. And then he looks at me and he's like, okay, you buy me Coca-Cola? And I was like, yes, I will buy you Coca-Cola. And so we're having this like amazing conversation at this table with my broken Thai, which is essentially like sawadee ka, which means hello, and that's it. And then Oi's broken English, which is just like, how are you? Where are you from? And that becomes this like 3-hour long conversation of me and Oi and the volunteers. And before we know it, we have a table full of like 10 to 15 boys. I mean, the boys were coming, hanging out, leaving, coming and hanging out. And you could see the stares from the Western men. You could see the hate on their faces because we were taking away all of the boys from them. From the boys giving them massages and kissing them and leaving with them. So, but you know what? At the same time, I felt like we had the Lord's presence because it was this protection. It was this just diameter of a shield that those perpetrators, those child predators couldn't tap into. And so it was the coolest night, and for the rest of the nights we would go back into the bars and hang out with these boys. And that first night, Oi came up to me and he grabbed me and he was like, okay, he looked so concerned. Like this is when it was gonna end forever. And he was like, okay, tomorrow you'll come back, yeah? And I'm like, okay, sure. And he said, okay, what time? I'm like, oh my gosh, Oi. I was like, okay, we'll be here at 9 o'clock, okay? So myself, Anthony, some other volunteers, we would go back into those bars every single night. And I remember on our last night, they had a party for us. And they got like a few roses, and all the boys had given me the name Kulak, which means rose. So Oi thought for some reason to give me this name. And so they had little roses on all the tables and little signs that said, goodbye, my friends. And they spelled bye instead of B-Y-E, but B-U-Y. Goodbye, my friends. And I mean, I just cried. And by that time, my husband had arrived. And so he was able to see and he was able to experience what I had gone through. Because initially he's like, oh, what's the big deal about, okay, give them some money and, you know, I mean, how do you think you're gonna help them? But when I took him into the red light district, that's where he was, I mean, the boys gave him the name Vin Diesel. I don't think he looks like Vin Diesel, but it was really, really cute because he has a shaved head and he's kind of got muscles, and so the boys gave him the name Vin Diesel. And so Vin Diesel's walking through this bar and all the boys are surrounding my husband and they're like, oh, you're so strong, and they're like, we want that. So I remember looking over and I see my husband doing push-ups on the ground, and then I look over and there's one of the boys like trying desperately, his arms are shaking to do these push-ups. And I mean, my husband was just so completely in love with these boys, just like I was. And so, you know, by the end of the week, you know, the boys are going up to my husband saying, oh, okay, next time you come back, we have muscles, okay? And Jim's like, all right, drink your protein shakes and, you know, eat your eggs. And so we end up going back to the States, and I'm, again, a blubbering mess. I'm just so upset, and I'm crying, and I can just remember Oi's face and the other boys' faces. And I get back to the States, and I go back to work at the youth center, and everyone's just like, whoa, something shifted in you. Like, something's happened. And we don't see you here for a long time. Is there anything you want to share with us? And at the time I said, no, it's not like, I mean, what do you think? I'm going to go to Thailand and like start an organization? Well, my husband, you know, after seeing me crying for 2 weeks straight, you know, he finally said, you know what, Alex, I think you should go to Thailand and help those boys. And I'm like, yeah, right, what do you think I'm going to do? Like, that's impossible. I don't speak Thai, I don't know the culture, I know everything about Latin America, I know nothing about Asia. It's not going to happen. And him being kind of the entrepreneur, the go-getter that he is, we really balance each other out. He's like, you can do it. Just think, you know, don't think too much about it. If you think too much about it, you'll freak yourself out. Just do it. And I just see this Nike ad, you know, I always joke, this just do it kind of scrolling through my head, because he made it seem so easy. And so next thing we did, you know, I sold every possession that I could think of. I called Anthony, I called my friends, I was like, what can we do to raise money? I sold my wedding ring, I sold my engagement ring, you know, anything that I could sell, I was doing. And that would give me the money that I would use to buy my ticket to go back to Chiang Mai. And so 4 months later, January, I ended up going back to Chiang Mai. And I mean, I was just there. You get there in the morning, and I was waiting all afternoon. I was like, is it nighttime yet? Is it nighttime yet? Because I was so anxious to go back to the bars to see if Oi was still there. And inside, I'm like, he's probably not going to be there. That's like a total, I don't think he'll be there. And so I go to the bars, and at this point, I'm by myself because there's no volunteers with me. And I go into the bars, and there's Oi. Same bar stool, same bar, and he sees me, and I see him, and it's like, I mean, he just rushes over to me, and he's like, you know, what are you doing here? I mean, you know, and I look at him, and I'm like, well, I told you I was going to come back. I didn't know when, but I was going to come back. And he's like, yeah, but everybody always says that they're going to come back, and they never come back. 2 weeks pass, 1 month pass, and they forget about us. And that really struck me, because for the first time, I was able to show them that I was a person of my word, and I was going to do what I said I was going to do and have follow through. So it ended up being that, you know, I hung out at the bars that night. All of the boys came over, and we ended up going to the cafe next to my hotel. And so that would be kind of the offset, what would launch Urban Light, because it was there that I told Oi, I said, okay, if you really want to change your life, if you really want me to help you, then what do you need? And he said, I want to learn English. He said, you know, I want to be a tour guide. And to be a tour guide, you need to learn English. He said, so you teach me English. I was like, okay, done deal. That I can do. So I do my little ABC chart, and I said, tomorrow, 3 o'clock, you come to the cafe next to my hotel, and I'll teach you English. So that day, at 3 o'clock on the dot. Now, what teenager do you know shows up, like, right on time? And he was there before me, and he's looking at his watch, and he's like, Kula, you're late. And I'm like, I'm 5 minutes late, it's not, you know, and so he was so eager to learn. And so there he is with his cigarette, and I'm teaching him A, B, C, D, and, you know, and he's doing great. And I'm like, this is amazing. So the next day, 2 more people show up. The next day, 5 more boys show up. And so by the end of the week, I have 8 boys that are in this cafe, and the owner comes up to me, and she's like, Alex, you know, we love you, thank you for your business, but we cannot have 8 rowdy teenage boys with tattoos and hanging out at our cafe. It's bad for business. And so that's when it hit me, where I was like, well, where can I teach these boys? If I can't teach them in a public area, like, what do we do? So I ended up starting the Urban Light Youth Center. So I ended up, for $300, renting out this really small space in the red light district, and that's where we would initiate kind of the work that we're doing right now. And I tell you, it's been an absolute completely challenging journey, but you know, it's such proof that these boys, they do want to change. They've just never been given the options. They've never been given the chance or given the opportunity to strive and to thrive. And you know, the boys at the youth center now they get a hot meal every day. The boys go to the market, the boys come back from the market, they choose what they want to eat, they cook it up, they cook for all of us. And for $10 a day, we create this massive lunch, community lunch. The boys end up cleaning up after that, and then we jump into education, so they get 2 solid hours, which doesn't seem like a lot, but in the world of these boys, it's the most that they've ever gotten in their lifetimes. But 2 hours of English or life skills, so we're teaching them about HIV, about STIs, about communication, about addiction, about drug use, about reproductive health, about teen pregnancy, about all of these key things that otherwise would not be on their radar. And so in addition to that, we're doing health services, health checkups. Once a month we close down the center and we open up a clinic day. A lot of these boys, because they're involved in such risky behavior, they don't get to have health services. They don't get to have health checkups. And I think that's really frustrating for them, because they never know their status. And they don't have faith. They don't have faith in health professionals. They don't have faith in community people like police officers or fire departments, or, you know, the police every single night will go through the red light district, will pass the 11-year-old boy who's kissing this foreigner or leaving with a foreigner, and they'll go up to the bars and they'll get their bribe and then they'll walk right out. And so there's nobody that's instilling faith in these kids. And so I can just tell you a quick story. You know, when I was first starting off, I didn't speak any Thai, and one of the boys was really sick. He was coughing up blood. And so I was like, okay, we have to take you to the hospital. You could have TB, you could be really sick, you could have internal bleeding. I don't know, I'm not a health professional, but we have to get you to the doctor. And so he looked at me and he was like, nope, I'm not going to the hospital. Like, I don't care, I'd rather die. And he said, okay, I'll go with you though. I will protect you. I will make sure that they are good to you. And so we end up going to the hospital. And in Chiang Mai, you know, it's a small city, but at the same time, the hospital was massive. And the customer service says, okay, take your boy, you know, take him up to the 8th floor. And I go to the elevator and I push the up button, and you just see my boy's eyes like get wide. And he looks at me and he's like, I'm not doing that. And I'm like, what? I'm like, it's an escalator, like, you know, elevator. Like, you go up, and he's just like, And so I'm trying to convince him to get into the elevator because he's never seen an elevator before. Because you have to remember, these are boys from up north, from far outside the city in the most rural setting. So finally, after, you know, 5 minutes of debating this, like, trust me, I'm going to get you, you'll be okay. He gets into the elevator. And I have him push the button, and he's just, you know, it's moving, and he's just like concerned. But then the doors open, and he sees that you go up and you get out. And so he's just like, wow. He's like, all right, I've got this. And he's like so confident. You can see his chest kind of come up because he's like, I did this, and it wasn't that hard. And so we're sitting in the waiting room of this kind of area, waiting area, and the doctor says, okay, you can come into the doctor's office now. And the nurse goes to lead us. And the boy takes off his shoes, which you do as a form of respect. When you're going into somebody's home, you always take off your shoes. And so my boy stands outside the door and starts to like take off his shoes. And the nurse starts to laugh. And she starts to point to her other nurses and point at him. And he's looking around at me like, did I do something wrong? What did I do? And of course, he didn't know that when you're in a hospital, you don't need to take off your shoes, but he was taught always to be respectful to elders and to adults. And so I became so enraged that these health professionals would make fun of this young little boy and make him feel so inadequate. So I did what anybody would do. I took off my shoes right there with him. And I'm like, all right, so we're both in bare feet, you know? And that, I think, for him, he looked up at me and he was like, okay, cool, I'm not alone in this. And, you know, he then becomes the ambassador for us. He then goes and tells his other friends, oh, like if Kulap goes with you or if the other Urban Light people go with you, it's okay. Like you'll be good. But it's those moments where you realize how Urban Light's playing a role in these boys' lives, because otherwise they wouldn't go to get HIV testing. They wouldn't go to the hospital. They wouldn't go to the police when things happen to them. And, you know, those are just a few of the situations that Urban Light's been able to help. But Anthony's been able to come out, and it's so good to be able to have him see what's happened, because he was with me that night that my life completely was shaken. And he came out this past January, and the boys, I mean, these are amazing boys. These are boys that are spunky, charismatic, wonderful, protective. We had a volunteer who was actually, it was right before Anthony came, and he was there for a month. And he created this amazing relationship with the boys. The boys loved him. And we had this one boy who, thank God, I prayed so hard, but thank God he's removed from the community right now. But he would come to the center, and he was a drug trafficker, would always try to recruit our boys, was always hanging around, was just, you saw him and you just felt kind of the evilness that was pushing him towards us. And he's a great kid. He's just really lost his way right now. But he would just always pick on his kids and always fight our kids, and we'd always have to battle him. Well, this one kid, Ray, thought that he could steal our volunteers' tennis shoes. And so we leave our shoes all outside, and no one's ever taken shoes from the center. But this one guy felt like it was okay to take our volunteers' shoes. Well, when the boys realized that Ray had taken our volunteers' tennis shoes, they went in an uproar. They were just like, oh, no, 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 no. And you see them, it's just like bees kind of buzzing all around. And one of the boys, Tan, who's 17 years old and like the shyest of all of our boys, obsessed with table tennis, but the shyest of them all, looks at Adrian and he's like, here. And he takes his shoes from the ground, picks them up and says, take my shoes. And Adrian, when he tells me this story, like he bawls every time, because he's like, this kid who has nothing, who sleeps on the street, who is like the sweetest kid in the world, is giving me his flip-flops. And so he ended up